Welcome back, Principal Matters podcast listeners, to episode 482. I am Dr. Jen Schwanke, and here with my co-host, William Parker. Hi, Will.
It's great to see you, and Happy New Year. I know we're recording this right before we start back to a new semester, but it's going to be coming out after people are back in school. How was your vacation? And I heard you guys have had some snow.
Yes, we've had some snow and some real cold. There was a couple days there where it was so windy. We were in the, -10 range with the wind chill. But, I love the holiday break because even for those who don't celebrate, people just kind of shut it off. They really do.
Yeah, I shut down my social media this break, and it was just so refreshing. And we've had warm enough weather that we were able to be outside a lot, and back to Tennessee to see family.
Nice.
We have a special guest this week, don't we?
Yeah, I was going to say, we got off on talking about our break and we didn't even give the teaser. We have a special guest this week. Charles Rizzuto is joining us today. And, he's a great guy. He was a National Teacher of the Year and has some wonderful ideas about how health and PE, which was what he taught, can really be integrated into the academic, social, and emotional framework. He's an assistant principal in New York. So we're going to be talking with him. But before we do that, we have a Q&A, and this is your crazy idea, this question today.
Last semester, we played a recording from an interview you had hosted with students from Ohio State University, a master's class you were teaching, and you invited me as a guest speaker. And they asked such great questions. And Jen, I was looking back to some of those questions recently, and I thought, the only regret I had from that is you didn't get to answer the same questions. And so this was one that I was like, I want to hear Jen's take on this. And the question was, how has your leadership style evolved over the course of your principalship? And how has it impacted the way you manage others?
I love this question. And I remember you answering it. And I remember thinking, I don't know how to answer that, which is, maybe serendipity that I got a longer runway. Here's what I think. I think it has changed quite a bit internally. I don't know that it has changed externally. So I think if you asked someone who was on my staff my first year serving as an administrator to now, they might not notice the difference, but internally, big changes. I'm a lot calmer. I have a lot more faith that things will be okay. I used to spend a lot of time thinking that every single thing was a huge barn fire, right? And I had to show up and be a hero and fix it. Where now I'm much more apt to believe that it's going to be okay. Yeah. And that's more an inside job.
I remember having a sense, especially among older leaders when I was a younger educator, that they were just, it seemed deliberately slow. Mm-hmm. And I, at the time, I wasn't sure if that was wisdom or just the fact that they didn't have as much energy as I did. And now maybe it's a little bit of both, but I also, now that I'm at that age and I look back, I realize, like, man, decision-making, I mean, sometimes it's so rapid fire, but there are some decisions that if you can just slow down and think before you act, you're going to save yourself so much trouble. And so I think for me, that evolution too has just been the ability to slow down a little, to think ahead, and to try to anticipate all of the different outcomes that will happen from this decision.
Go ahead. I know. I was just going to say, what is so critical about this is what it communicates to others. Yeah. I think I needed to communicate to others, I'm on my way, I'm coming, I'll fix it. Whereas what I should be communicating is, it's okay. It's fine. Yeah. We'll get there. No problem. And let them know it's going to be okay as well.
Well, I was just listening back to an interview we did with Guy Kawasaki, who was the final guest of 2025. And he has a podcast called Remarkable People. He's been interviewing remarkable people from all over the world for a long time. And, his background is more in technology and in business than education, but he shared 3 things in that podcast I would encourage listeners to go back and listen to, where he said in his study of remarkable people, they are typically committed to a growth mindset. They are very gritty, but then that third category he added was grace. They're typically gracious. And I don't know, Jen, if I've evolved that way over time, but I certainly hope I have. And I think listeners Anybody listening to this right now, just quick reminder that we never do this work perfectly. But I do think that keeping those thoughts in mind can be super helpful.
Yes, absolutely. So that's my answer. And I'll have to keep thinking about that because I do wonder where I will be as a leader in 5 years. But Charles Rizzuto has evolved quite a bit as a leader himself, someone who is finding himself unexpectedly in a leader seat, so an official leader seat. So stay tuned, everyone, for a wonderful conversation with Charles Rizzuto.
Well, thank you, Jen. And if they want to listen to other podcasts, you can check out this podcast at williamdparker.com. Jen, how can they stay connected with your wonderful newsletter for your weekly updates?
Absolutely. Check out my website, jenschwanke.com, and you can subscribe there. And every Tuesday, you'll get a newsletter with whatever's rattling around in Jen Schwanke's head.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking so forward to this interview. And Principal Matters listeners, we hope you have a great week. Thanks for listening, and thanks for doing what matters. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Why is iExcel used in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts? Because it works. Research across 45 states shows that iExcel schools outperform other schools on state tests. With iExcel, you get a personalized online learning and teaching solution that helps you improve achievement, empower teachers, track progress, and more. This one platform for K-12 helps teachers accomplish what normally would require dozens of other tools. For example, as students practice skills, iExcel automatically adapts to ensure each learner is always supported and challenged at the right level. iExcel also provides every student with a personalized learning plan to help them close knowledge gaps effectively. One of my favorite things about iExcel is their personalized test prep tool. For exams like the SAT and ACT, iExcel will analyze a student's most recent score and generate a custom list of skills to help them boost their scores. If you want to take the load off your teachers so they can do their best work, iExcel can help. Learn more at iExcel.com/PM.
You're listening to Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast.
Welcome back, Principal Matters podcast listeners. This is Dr. Jen Schwanke here again with you, and I have a guest that I'm so excited for you to meet. His name is Charles Rizzuto. Hi, Charles.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm great. And I think we need to tell listeners that, first of all, you are a fan of the Principal Matters podcast, are you not? Right?
Oh, I am a super fan of the Principal Matters podcast.
Okay. And so that's how I found you, Charles. You reached out to us. You said, hey, I'm an assistant principal. I'm in my 4th year. You depend on the show to kind of improve your practice. And also you have a list, you said, of when you become a principal. And so you're just kind of gathering information in case that ever happens.
Correct. Yeah, I have a list. If I ever become a principal that I've been adding things to since I became an assistant principal, actually probably a little bit before that, but your show has definitely given me some ideas that added to that list.
Perfect. Well, Charles is not on the list just because he likes us, even though that's very important. Mm-hmm. We're talking to Charles today because he's got a lot of things to say and a lot of experience under his belt. So I'm going to take a step back, Charles, and don't blush, but I'm going to talk a little bit about some of your accomplishments here. For our listeners, Charles currently serves as an assistant principal of Islip High School in New York, following 15 years as a health and PE teacher at Oyster Bay High School. A nationally recognized speaker, Charles has presented across the country on high-quality instruction, leadership, school culture, cultural proficiency, and social and emotional wellness. His highly regarded keynote address, titled The Driver's Seat, has been featured by numerous school districts and state organizations. And in addition to his school leadership role, Rizzuto teaches graduate courses at Adelphi University and Cambridge College, focusing on the influence of social issues in education, instructional technology, models-based instruction, and social-emotional literacy. His teaching excellence has been recognized by students and peers alike. He was nominated as a Professor of Excellence at Adelphi in 2021 and named National Teacher of the Year by Shape America in 2022. And that's not all. Charles has other awards. He was named Eastern District Physical Education Teacher of the Year, New York State Physical Education Teacher of the Year, New York State Health Education Amazing Person of the Year, and Drug Free Hero. He was a contributing author of the New York State Physical Education Learning Standards, served as president of Health Education for New York State, and sat on the National Health Education Council. So, listeners, we have somebody who knows what he's talking about. It's amazing. And I'm so glad you agreed. When you reached out to us, Charles, I replied, I think it said, "Hey, come on the podcast," because I really wanted to talk not only about this decorated 15-year career as a health and physical education teacher, but I want to talk about what prompted that shift into administration and how your deep classroom experience shaped your daily decisions as an assistant principal.
Yeah, so I did blush a little bit. Thank you
Okay,
for the
good.
great introduction. You set the bar really high for the conversation that's about to follow. But to address your first question, I was a little reluctant to step into the role of an administrator initially. I'm somebody that loves learning, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I get anxiety when I feel like I'm not learning at the rate that I want to be. So the next natural progression in terms of my education was going for school building and school district leadership, right? I wanted to see education from the other side. So I got those two certifications. And I remember specifically at my tenure meeting, prior to receiving those certifications, our superintendent at Oyster Bay at the time, Dr. Laura Seinfeld, um, talked to me about possibly entering into administration one day. And I shared my reluctance, and it's similar for a lot of people, right? Like, am I going to lose connections with the students? I
Right.
love teaching so much and all of those types of things. And she gave me one piece of advice that really stuck with me, and that was, Charlie, you're not the type of person that's going to lose connections with kids. You're just going to figure out how to do it differently, and you could broaden the scope of your impact if you switch seats, right? So that was like
Right.
an overview of the message that she gave to me. And that stuck with me as I went through my SBL and my SDL certifications.
Right.
Um, I finished with both of those, and I kind of started to wonder if I could be good as an administrator, right? So I
Right.
started looking at assistant principal openings, but the one thing that I wanted was a place that I felt like I could fit and serve the students and the school community well, and that would that building, that institution, that district would be a good fit for me. So I actually only applied to two places. I applied to Islip and I applied to another school district. I started moving forward in both districts. The process at Islip moved way quicker. I
Hmm.
had 3 interviews in 4 days, which is super fast, but I liked
Right.
that, right? There was no time to think and wonder. It was interview, phone call, day off, interview, phone call, right?
Right.
Um, so I got offered that position while the other process was still going on, and I was just confident that I could be a good fit here. So I accepted that position. And to answer the second part of your question, um, I think that I stretched my tent a lot as a teacher. I wasn't afraid to fail. I hate cliches. I'll probably throw a couple out during the course of the podcast, but I was never afraid to fail as a teacher. So I feel like I tried a lot of things. I got dirty, I failed, I made mistakes, and then I worked really hard to kind of come back around, identify the problem, and then fix it to improve my teaching and my practice as an educator. Um, my why has always been to positively impact the trajectory of a kid's life. I
Right.
think during the course of the podcast, some of my backstory might surface. So you
Right.
might learn a little bit about where that comes from. But I often say I didn't have the best upbringing or time as a child, but I also didn't have the worst, right? There were plenty of people that had it harder than I did. But I knew in high school that I didn't have the language for it really yet, but having the language now, I knew I wanted to positively impact kids. I just didn't know what my what would be. I didn't know how I was going to do that. Eventually, I went to education, but I never want to enter into a role that isn't going to fit my why. And the last piece for me was recognizing that I could still live my why sitting in a different seat and taking on a different role. And that kind of started to quell my anxiety a little bit. So I tried it. And I'm still making some mistakes, but just like as a teacher, I'm trying to fix those mistakes and just get better and better every day, every semester, every year, etc.
Right. Right. And first of all, thank you for correcting my pronunciation of islip. Us dumb Ohioans don't know all the New York terms. But I also I love what you said there, Charlie, because I had the exact same worries. I thought, I want to be in the classroom because I want to make a difference. And I also had a mentor who said, no, 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 it's a different kind of impact and it's broader in a lot of ways. But you said you're still making mistakes. I mean, we all make them every day. And also this is a human business. I can't tell you how many times I may be make a mistake. I'm doing air quotes there. That was absolutely the right thing at the time. But then that dumb reflection you got to do, and you're like, I could have done that a little bit better. So it's just occupational hazard, I guess, to do that self criticism at the end.
Yeah, no, agreed. And but that's also one of the most rewarding parts, right? When you
Right.
make a mistake, you reflect on it, you figure out where you went wrong, and then that situation arises again, and then you feel like you got it right, at least in the moment
That's
again,
right.
and then you
That's
reflect,
right.
right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So when we first communicated with each other, you were discussing the idea of a quality, comprehensive, intentional, standard driven, and inclusive health and PE program. And that's a lot, right? And I'm someone who my whole entire life I've been incredibly active. I deeply believe in wellness, health, and physical education. Um, and I know that many principals believe that in theory, but they don't really know necessarily what that means, right? And so, what tell for our listeners, what is the difference between a truly great health PE program and a merely average one? What are some of the really common misperceptions that are out there? And I cannot wait to hear your answer to this question.
Yeah, so I'll start by throwing this out there, right? So oftentimes I say PA is not PE, right? So physical activity in and of itself does not create a physical education program, right? There's a chasm between physical activity and physical education. So one thing that I talk about often is physical activity is the vehicle to deeper, more meaningful learning that needs to occur inside a comprehensive physical education program, right? Oftentimes, the lessons that can occur inside health and PE are some of the most transferable, relevant learning experiences a student will have inside any school building, anywhere ever. And that's not to diminish any educational discipline, right? Jen, you and I can both sit here and advocate for the importance of every educational discipline, right? Whether it be math,
Absolutely.
science, English, social studies. We have a great cosmetology program here in Islip. I could advocate for the importance of that and having that in house. But when you really break it down, every single day in health and physical education, students should be learning things that they can't necessarily Google, right? And that
Right.
will transfer into their everyday life and the school community at large, right? Which might surface later on in the conversation also. But I start with PA is not PE, right? So when we look at physical education, we can't be so immersed in the optic of it, right? Are kids moving? Are they sweaty? Are they smiling? Okay, good. Check. PE was
Right.
great today, right? There's deeper learning that needs to occur. My good friend William Bodie, who lives down in North Carolina and taught PE for years, he recently retired, used to say movement is our text, right? We don't have a
Right.
textbook, but movement is our text. And we use that, like I said, to generate deeper learning. So one activity that I do with my students at Adelphi, because that's in person, right? Cambridge, I don't drive to Massachusetts to teach, right? So
Right.
Adelphi is in person. One of the things that we start to unpack is the learning domains, right? Cognitive, psychomotor, and affective, and the national learning standards for PE, because it starts to really paint a clearer picture of PA not being PE.
Right.
And there were 5 learning standards in PE, national learning standards. Now there's 4, but you could look at it either way. Most people are probably more familiar with the old ones from Shape America. But when you look at it, and I asked them, okay, standard 1, would that fall primarily, if you were going to assess the learning in that standard, would that primarily be psychomotor, cognitive, or affective? And it's psychomotor. And then as you move through the rest of the standards, not one of the other 4 national standards would primarily fall in the psychomotor domain. It's either a even split on how you would assess the learning in that standard between psychomotor and cognitive, which I think would be standard 3 in the old standards. But 2, 4, and 5 are either cognitive or affective in nature. So when we just look at the national learning standards, physical education is a valuable educational discipline. It's not just about games and activities, although that's an important part of it, right? The
Right.
joy, the movement, etc. And then when you look at health education, I think one misconception that people find in health ed is it's very content driven. And a good friend of mine, Andy Horn, that teaches in Illinois, has a great quote. And one of the things that he says is the content will change, but the skills remain the same. So a quality health education program is skills based, and you use similar to PE, right? You'll use an activity to teach something bigger. In health, you use the content to teach the skills, whether it be, analyzing influences, accessing valid and reliable information, goal setting, decision making. Regardless of the skill you're teaching, you use the content, which will change over time, to teach that skill, right? Like when I took health education, we didn't learn about vaping, right? And now that's at
Right,
the
right,
forefront of just about every conversation that occurs in any high school or middle school across the country, right?
right,
So that's kind of the premise or the meat to that, right? A quality PE program isn't about activity. It's about the learning and using activity to kind of drive that, right? Even if you're
right,
not learning about the activity and health, it's got to be
right,
skills based.
right. So I think I'm hearing you say that PE helps students understand the role of physical activity in overall health and fosters those qualities like discipline, responsibility, empathy, positive learning environment. And what I'm thinking about, I have two thoughts that I want you to respond to. One is I I think because of the movement piece in the learning, it's critical, right? Because that's what I remember. I mean, I remember Mr. Handwork, first grade. I remember him teaching us how to do an obstacle course. I remember that.
Right.
I do not remember how I learned to form my letters, but I remember that because there was that kinesthetic, piece to it. And so in a lot of ways, it's kind of the ideal learning model, right? You're teaching these standards, this discipline using movement.
Yeah. Yeah, and even outside of PE, right? We talk about the kinesthetic classroom, right? And the importance
Right.
of movement and the connection to learning, right? So
Right.
it's naturally ingrained in a physical education environment. But I would actually
Right.
go even a little bit deeper. The example that you provided is spot on, but I dig a little deeper, right? So the learning, like there's standards and grade level outcomes, I should say, that touch upon things like leadership, right? Social
Right.
emotional learning and social emotional literacy is embedded in our standards in PE, right? So
Right.
we might play, or you might have a choice of these four activities today. We're all learning the same thing, but we might just use those activities to surface how we recognize leadership qualities in others or in ourselves. But the learning has nothing to do with the game. It's how these other things surface as we move with each other,
That's right. That's
right?
right. And I think that's critical for principals to understand, because they're going to evaluate teachers
Right.
and they might not know all these things. That's why I wanted to have you on the podcast. I remember the moment this clicked into place with me. I was an assistant principal, and the PE teacher was passionate about um, her her curriculum, and she had a big sign, and it said PE is not just glorified recess. And she was someone who would not let us say gym. She made us say PE, and everybody kind of did some eye rolling, but I'll be god darned, that did change the culture. People would, have to think about those words, that physical education. It's the education that leads to that more positive learning environment, better academic performance, and you, by the way, threw me a softball with the SEL piece. That's going to lead me to my next question.
Right.
Many schools right now are really thinking about the social emotional learning piece. And so tell us how a high quality health PE program can be the central engine for a school's SEL initiatives and contribute to the overall school culture.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. So there's a lot of directions that I could take that, and I'm probably going to touch upon a few of them. But kind of like I said earlier, right? So health and physical education is the place where social and emotional learning and social and emotional literacy can surface most organically, right? Because it's present every single day in the interactions that students have, specifically in the PE space, but also in a well-constructed health education classroom, right? Just because of the things that you're going to talk about in health education and the interactions, the unpredictability of the interactions that students might have in PE, right? So, but again, not to be cliche, but I think in any classroom you could generate really strong relationships with your students. But I think PE and health education create unique opportunities to bond with students in a very unique way. Like for example, in health education, we talk about relationships, right? And one of the things that I remember from my childhood was that inside my house, we never said I love you to one another, We just never said it for whatever reason. And I kind of started when I was in middle school saying love you to my parents. It was just, I guess, easier to get out than I love you, right?
Right,
And I
right,
remember when we were talking about relationships, I wanted to surface that because I know I have students in my room that are probably experiencing something similar,
right,
right? So we did a lesson on what the word love means and how different relationships, the word love can mean different things. And I ended that lesson by reminding them that when they enter the school building or in my classroom, they are loved. And from that day forward, every single time they left my class, they heard the same thing. I love you. I mean it. And I'll see you tomorrow. Right. So, like, just the fact that health creates an opportunity to discuss relationships and organically segue into a conversation about what love looks like strengthened my relationships with my students. Because you know that old saying, like, I don't dismiss you, the bell dismisses you.
right.
I had that without ever saying that to them because I tested it one day, right? We just said we like to reflect and we like to test things and make sure we're doing the right thing. One day I didn't say it to my students and they didn't leave.
Yeah, yeah,
So the bell rang and they waited for me to say, I love you, I mean it, I'll see you tomorrow. Right. So like it was important to them, regardless of what their background was or where they came from. Right. So
right,
I'll kind of start there, but also like physical education, you talk about conflict resolution. And I said earlier, opportunities to serve as a leader and the opportunity to regulate your own emotions when you're engrossed in a situation that's less than ideal. Right. So I would use the zones of regulation. And, Yale has the ruler program. I use the zones of regulation in my physical education class because it tied into our curriculum so nicely. It surfaced social and emotional learning. It helps students regulate their emotions, learn what activities they might be able to choose to engage in that day based on what it was that they were carrying with them that day. And then again, back to transfer, not only do we transfer all of these experiences to real world situations, but I always referenced our school community, right? When we talked about leadership and things of that nature, how can you turn around, leave the gym today, leave the health classroom today, advocate for yourself and others, advocate for causes, and take those leadership roles that you practiced in here and become a leader inside our school building, which does start to shift culture, right? When
right,
students take ownership over their school, that's probably the largest culture shift that a school can have, right?
right. What as I'm hearing you talk, I'm thinking about, I wrote a book on conflict management for principals. And when I presented about that book, many times I would say, you guys, go see your PE teachers. They do conflict management instruction
Hmm.
all the time. They're not swooping in and fixing every conflict. They're teaching the kids how to manage conflict. So when you have a PE teacher who maybe not is not as involved with the students who might be fussing about something, it might be because they're standing back and saying, these kids know how to work through this conflict. They know how to, and they're not coming to tattle to me. They're going to work through it.
Yeah, I was always the secondary resource, right? Well,
Right.
let me rephrase that. Not always. We got to the point where I was a
Yes.
secondary resource, right? And you see in quality physical education, elementary school programs, conflict corners and things of that
Right.
nature, where there's a stated procedure for how Jen and I are going to resolve this conflict before we bring it to Mr. Rizzuto, right?
That's right.
That's the intentionality of it. It's intentionally taught and assessed in a variety of ways, right?
Right. Wouldn't that be wonderful if we could do that in adult relationships, colleagues, friends, marriages? We could say, okay, conflict corner.
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
not make this into something it's not. Because usually when I see kids go into a conflict corner, usually one of them will say, okay, sorry, I didn't mean that, because they want to get out of that corner and get back to the game.
Right.
And that's metaphorical, of course, getting back to the game. So now you're sitting in the assistant principal's chair. What is the most impactful thing that a principal, assistant principal, dean, school leader can do to support, and I would even say elevate, their health and PE department, moving it from being seen as, specials or related arts, to an essential part of the academic, social, emotional fabric of a school?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say to that is recognize the nuances that may exist, but don't lower expectations,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm looking at it almost from like the benefit of the student, right? Um, so every classroom that you walk into, when you look at it, might have a slightly different optic. Again, like I said earlier, PE may be the largest one,
Right.
but don't lower the expectations of lesson structure. right? Don't lower the expectations of the assessment of learning, right? Don't lower the expectations that could really benefit the student and the student's time in that space. Don't lower the expectations for things like participation. Students should have a variety of options in physical education class on how they're going to engage with the lesson and the learning for that day, but in a physical way, right? So
Right.
recognize the nuances that might create differences because every discipline has differences. But don't lower the expectations, don't lower the bar, right? The rigor, right? The three R's,
Right.
rigor, relevance, and relationships. We're kind of hitting on all of them. The rigor in PE should be just as appropriately high as in any other educational discipline. Assessment should be occurring regularly. The feedback that you give any health or PE teacher, I'm focusing on PE right now, I'll get to health in a second to restructure my answer slightly, should be rooted in the same things that you would give any other teacher. Is it a practice in your building where you expect teachers to post their mastery objective, right? For me, once I learned how to do that effectively, I use the what, why, how framework. What are we learning today? Why are we learning it? And how am I going to know that I've learned it? That was a game changer for me, right? So if that's an
Right.
expectation in your building, that should be an expectation in physical education also.
Right.
And there
Right.
might be a little bit of resistance in the beginning, but I also feel like PE teachers recognize that you value them when you don't lower the expectations of what you expect to see in their class, right? And then on the health education side, all of those things also, but I would say meet with them often, and talk to them about community communication. Because I was when I was health education president for New York State, I ran like a pseudo ed camp at our conference. And one of the things that the health teachers that came to that really wanted to talk about was how to advocate for themselves. Like they teach advocacy, but how to appropriately advocate for themselves with building leadership in order to kind of quell some of the pushback that they were receiving from community members about some of the things that they were teaching, right? Because we know how
Right.
that temperature is right now around some of these topics, right?
Right. That's right.
So I think that's one of the best ways to meet your health teachers where they are, right? Check in on
Right.
them regularly, regardless of your role inside the building or the district, and help them with communication outward to the community, and about the things that they're teaching inside their room.
Right. Right. That makes a lot of sense. I can almost feel some of our listeners asking a question, so I'm going to ask it.
Ask
I'm
it.
a principal. I have a PE teacher who's been there a long time and just wants left alone. Right. I just leave me alone. I have my strike unit, my swing unit, my whatever, all my units, leave me alone. I don't want to post the standards outcomes. What I would say, not being a health PE expert like you, I would say you handle it like you would any other resistant teacher. But tell me more about that. What should a principal do if they're like, that won't work with my person?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So my first response would be kind of to yours, right? Handle it how you would any other resistant teacher, right? Use all the tools in your toolbox that you would use for a situation like that, regardless of what the discipline would be. So if you haven't done this part already, this would be my next suggestion. So in my experiences, and not only in the buildings that I've worked in, but in the buildings that I've visited to do, some support work, right? Or different states or communities that I visited to present at conferences, talking to administrators, talking to teachers, things of that nature. Sometimes the pushback comes from a place that's deeply seated over years where they felt like they were invisible anyway,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So they were never checked in on unless it was time for that formal observation,
Right.
right? That was the only time that anybody would pay a visit to them. So they had their little corner in the building. So I would say the first step is to let them know how much you value them and the power that educational discipline and that them as a human being, as a teacher, can have in terms of the impact that they can have on students, right?
Right.
So make sure that they understand that explicitly.
You know what? That triggered another memory of mine. That same PE teacher who had the sign that said PE is not glorified recess. She came to me once and she said, when people come and see me, her gym was way down at the end of the hall. She said, people send kids down when they want a basketball or when they want a kickball or
Yep.
they need a volleyball because they're going to do a physics lesson or they're just going to do a little unit outside. She goes, that's when people come see me. And she said two problems. One is I don't want my equipment going down to the eighth grade science room for a quick little recess. Two, I'm teaching. And the lack of respect for me, she said, I would never walk into a chemistry teacher's classroom and say, give me a Bunsen burner, please. And I
Right.
certainly wouldn't send a kid. And that was really a moment for me because I thought, my gosh, she's right. We would, no one would say to an English teacher, hey, can I borrow all your copies of To Kill a Mockingbird? Because I want to go throw them around, you know?
Right.
So that was, we did some kind of staff work on that. You're not going to send kids down, interrupt her lesson, and say we need three footballs, right?
Yeah, so you actually kind of alluded to the next point that I was going to make in the progression of almost like a checklist. How do I go about this,
Right,
reluctant teacher? So then the next suggestion would be like that self-reflection. What messages, intentionally or probably unintentionally, do I send to my PE staff that would create this sentiment? So do they feel like the gym is the first place that you constantly go to take away when you need space for testing or you need to put on an
right,
assembly? Do they know that you exhausted every possibility? You
right,
made every effort to not take away their classroom,
right,
right? Because we wouldn't walk into the English teacher's room and be like, all right, tomorrow you can't hold class in here because the PE
right,
class is coming in and they're going to do, right? So
right,
make like, what messages are you sending to the staff that could have created that opposition or that defiance or that resistance? Are the messages that you're sending them outside of the words that you say to them, let them know that they're valued?
right,
Right. So
right.
I would check that also. And then the last thing that I was going to say, and the PE teachers listening right now, if there are any, might get mad at me for this, and I apologize. Um, but PD is, regardless of what it is, for the most part, is for PE and health teachers too. Right.
Right,
Oftentimes you hear, oh, that's not for us, or that's not for you. Right.
right,
We have this PE on, project-based learning. But PE staff, that's not for you. No, it is
right,
for them and it is for us. So don't exclude them for things that are for the quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes like you did before, teachers, right?
right,
Because that's
right,
something that over time can build up that resistance and that opposition.
right. Yeah, that makes such sense. And here's the irony of it is when PE teachers, I think, feel dismissed or not as valued, what is so ironic is that is the one class, in my view, where inclusivity is not only required and expected, but very successful often.
Yeah.
So a lot of us walk around the world saying, oh, thank goodness for PE, yet we draw from the well of PE too often. So, with that in mind, what are some of the biggest challenges in making health and PE truly exclusive for students of, all body types, physical activities, backgrounds? And what are some practical solutions you've seen work that make PE inclusivity in spite of all the barriers there that
Yeah.
actually make it work?
Yeah. So I would start by saying, to our leaders, to our health and PE teachers that might be listening, to anybody that's listening, really, recognizing the journey of cultural proficiency and
Right.
remaining ready to adapt, is priority. So I'm gonna share a quick story, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Um, so I remember, not even when I was a teacher, when I was a coach, right? I was a newer coach. This was years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And I had two athletes on my lacrosse team. I coached girls lacrosse. I coached boys lacrosse and then girls lacrosse for a long time. And one rule that I had was, if you were late to the meeting, the team meeting before a game, if you were a starter, you didn't start, right? You didn't play the first half. And
Right.
if you were a non-starter and there was an opportunity for you to play, I was going to play somebody else, right? Like rules and structure and accountability and all those things that we hear, right?
Right.
And I had two students. Well, they were my students also, but two athletes that, as we were exiting the meeting before a huge game, walked into the classroom. And I said, oh, girls, why are you late? And they said, Rizzuto, we're sorry, we're late. I said, no, I know you're late, but like, I'm here to work with you. Why were you late? Like, let's start talking this through. And they said, we're sorry, we were late. I said, I know, but what happened? And they
They
said,
practiced. They
no, no,
practiced. We're not going to say anything.
no. They said we were just late. And I said, okay, like, you know the rule. And they said, we know, and we're okay with it. Went to the
Okay.
game. They didn't start. They played in the second. They were phenomenal players. They played in the second half. They lit it up. I think between the two of them, they had like 7 or 8 goals. We lost by one. So if they would play the
Ah,
first half, we would have won. So fast forward months later, I find out why they were late. Um, a couple of days before their mom passed, I learned how sick their mom was. And they were late that day because they were with their dying mother. And they didn't tell me because culturally, you don't
Right.
share that. That stays
Right.
in-house.
Right.
And that changed a lot for me.
Right.
Right. So it caused as like a catalyst for me to really dive into culturally responsive practices and cultural proficiency, which go hand in hand, but you could look at them slightly different ways, right?
Right.
Cultural proficiency is the journey of, right? Um, but also like I got rid of all rules in my
Right.
classes and on my team. We had no more rules. We were not tied down to these things that could get in the way of life happening for people, right? And we started to just build culture. We
Right.
started to build culture on our team, and I focused more intensely on building culture in my classes as well. Right. So when we talk about that inclusivity of it, start with the journey of cultural proficiency and doing everything you can to learn as much as you can about your students, and then meet them where they are beyond the superficial. Right. I know
Right.
a lot of teachers do like the index card in the beginning, like what's your favorite food, what's your favorite class, and that's great. But can we dig a little bit deeper? Like Joe Bailey, who teaches PE. She was National PE Teacher of the Year years before me. She gave me a great question to ask on one of those surveys, and it was, how do you like to be praised? And when I heard that, I was like, that's a great question, because um, that their answer could be for a variety of different reasons. Like in some cultures, you don't speak unless you're spoken to, or females aren't supposed to be praised, or it could be mental health
Right.
reasons, whatever it was. So when I did that beginning of the year survey, I always left it open, allowing students to change their answers. It was a Google form, and I would always
Right.
remind them of it. Like, you could go back in and change your answers, whatever the case may be. So
Right.
that's a good starting point. But for PE specifically, pay attention to your scope and sequence, because some
Right.
kids get turned off over time in PE when you play the same things from 7th grade to 12th grade.
Right.
So
Right.
differentiate how they're going to move every year to keep their interests peaked, and also
Yeah.
differentiate what they're going to learn from year to year. So the learning is always new and it doesn't become bland or
Right.
boring. And also grading practices for PE
Right.
specifically. We have to move away from grading based on participation, because
Right.
that turns kids off to activity. And that's like the opposite of the message we want to send. The message we want to send is movement, or go move because it's good for you,
Right.
not because I'm grading you on how much you move.
Right. And by the way, principals, that's something that I really think could be reinforced to PE teachers. I think it's critical that you do change from year to year to year, because kids are watching. Those 7th graders are watching what 8th graders get to do in PE. 8th graders are watching what the 9th graders get to do in PE, and they look forward to it, right? So
Yeah.
if the trampoline comes out in 4th grade, the 3rd graders are watching. So that's something to keep in mind. So oh my gosh, I'm so mad. We're running out of time. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
don't be sorry. This is
I feel like I'm talking too
fantastic.
much.
No, I wrote too many questions. This is 1000% on me. But I have 2 more questions that I'm not going to give up. The first one is, you have this keynote called The Driver's Seat. Tell us
Yeah.
about the core message behind that, and explain to us how does it empower teachers and students?
Yeah, so I've given the driver's seat, quote unquote, multiple times now, for school districts and conferences, et cetera. And one of the things that I ask the place that I'm going is, what message are you trying to convey, or what's something that you're focusing on in your school? So the bones of it remain the same, but I'll tailor it differently depending on the needs of where I'm going, right? So I actually was asked to keynote Superintendent's Conference Day in my own district last year, which was a whole different world of anxiety, because when I
Yes.
go out to Minnesota and I keynote a conference, I fly home, right? When I
100%.
keynote our conference day, I see you tomorrow, right?
Right.
And I work with you. So I kind of tailored that one to cultural proficiency, because that's something that we're focusing on in my district. But um, other conferences that I've been to, specifically to PE, it really asks more questions than it provides answers. Because even now in my career, with all the accolades that you read before, I still have more questions than I have answers. I'm not an expert. I don't know everything. But it really pushes teachers' thinking on how they arrive for students on a daily basis, and really gets them to dig more deeply into their practice, right? So one question that I asked during the keynote is, do you love your students, and how do they know? Right. Another question that I ask is, how do you hold yourself accountable? Right. And I have a leadership coach, and her name's Julia Johnson, and she's amazing. And one piece of advice that she gave me for holding myself accountable is, find 3 people a couple of times a year in your personal and professional life, and ask them to tell you the thing that you might want to hear the least, but need
Right.
to hear the most. right?
Right.
And that's like a really interesting question to ask people, right?
Right.
So the keynote, not to give the whole thing away, because hopefully maybe I'll give a
Right.
keynote for some of your listeners one day. But a lot of personal story that ties into whatever the needs of the place that I'm speaking at are.
Right. Right. Well, and that's what people need, right? Those personal stories. And
Yeah.
so here we're gonna wrap up with you telling us something that you as an AP. Okay, so you mentioned your if when I become a principal list.
Yeah.
We're all curious.
Mhm.
What's one item on that list that you're most passionate or most dedicated to implementing one day if you ever do have the principal seat?
Yeah, so there's a lot, but the thing that I think I spent the most time thinking about ties into, I forget who your guest was that day, but a podcast of yours. And I think it could branch off into a million different directions if done right. And it's the structure of the meetings that you have with your team, right? It really is meetings and communication. In
Right.
PE, there's the sport fit principle, and it's an acronym. So I kind of stole the fit part of it to meet the needs of meetings, right? So in PE, fit stands for frequency, intensity, time, and type, and it's all about creating exercise programs. So for me, it's the frequency of meetings, right? How often are we going to be meeting? It's not the intensity of the meetings, but it's the
Right.
intentionality behind those meetings. It's how long are we going to spend in those meetings, and what type of meetings are we going to have, and what's the structure. So the beginning of a day, I think meeting at the beginning of every day before students arrive is really important. So right now, before becoming a principal, pie in the sky, hypothetically, those are called WWK meetings, right? What we know. So before the day starts, what do we need to share with each other? The things that we know entering into today. So we're prepared for what might surface or what we expect to surface. At the end
Right.
of the day, another 10 to 15 minute touch base WWL meeting, what we learned. So what happened today that we need to get everybody on the same page about? And then at the end of every week, right, maybe a Friday meeting, what's our PAGS meeting, our planning and goal setting meeting? How are we doing with the goals that we set at the beginning of the school year for the building, for our students, whatever it might be? What course do we need to correct? What adjustments do we need to make? So when we come in on Monday, we've already done that and we're ready to
Right.
start the week.
Right.
So I don't know if that's boring or not, but
No. No.
intentional conversation and communication is priority to me, because I feel like if your building team meets frequently enough, intent with the appropriate intentionality, with the appropriate amount of time and the appropriate amount of structure, issues that pop up for your teachers, for your students, for your parents, for the community can be proactively addressed,
Right.
right? If that
Right.
is done well.
That's right. That's right. And what you're really talking about there too is shared leadership. Shared leadership the meaning has been so diluted, but really shared leadership is, hey, let's talk about this. Let's do this all together. Let's
Agreed.
all be part of the same team. So,
Agreed.
Charlie, this has been so fun. I'm so glad you reached out that day. And I'm so glad that we had this conversation because I'm quite confident that a lot of our listeners learned a lot about health and PPE, but also, the energy, enthusiasm that you bring into leadership and wanting to expand that impact you have. So inspiring. So thank you so much. And tell our listeners where they can find you.
Okay, so you could email me, Charles Rizzuto, CharlesRizzuto3 @gmail.com. I'm trying to be better at social media, but you could find me on Instagram. I believe it's Rizzuto_education. I'm on LinkedIn. I believe I'm on there as Charles Rizzuto. And I don't really use Twitter or X as much as I used to. But
Yeah.
as a teacher, I was on there a lot, so I'm still on there now.
Yeah.
But email is probably the best way.
Perfect. Okay. And we'll put that in the show notes. So anybody who has questions for Charles or who wants to know more about the driver's seat can reach out. Thank you so much, Charles. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm not trying to make you blush, but like, being on this podcast, it's definitely going on my resume. I'll say that.
Little bit of a geek out moment. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Principal Matters.